Okay, that got intense real fast. Let's do this. Hi everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight. That was fun. That was really nice. So there were a couple of sticky bits. More towards the second hour, I guess, of that play. But honestly, not that bad. And I should probably learn how to use a map better. Just in general, it seems like probably good life advice. But that first hour, man, wow, like that was pretty great. Like a nice opening that I said at the beginning, I was curious, I was interested in how this game was going to sort of connect an established canon of characters, of at least sort of like a world and an atmosphere to a new game that is accessible to new players. And there's, I can't do sort of like a full analysis of that because I don't know the other game. I don't know the half of it that it's sort of coming from. But I can see sort of what it's doing with that opening that sort of takes place in a world that is established and then takes the character from that world somewhere else, somewhere wild, somewhere sort of like specifically wilder, because the grues, that are domesticated in the characters in that Teslamancer's homeland are now wild and dangerous. And then we sort of actually like leave that character because it's not that character's story. It's an ensemble story, and so that's sort of our introduction to the world. But then the sort of our establishment of the world, our tour of the world begins with native characters who are, actually the first character that we meet is bizarre in his sort of conception of the world. He sort of has this idea that he's on the moon, and that like I love the whole idea of like falling upwards, so they expected the sun to be below them and that they would fall upwards, I guess, into space. That's just like fascinating and weird and hard to wrap your mind around. And like I jump in and I feel like a fish out of water sort of in that narrative world immediately. And then sort of start exploring it. And then, so narratively it all ties together. And then the other thing that's doing that we talked about is that the characters are archetypal, right? They're familiar sorts of characters. They're easy to understand, right? They're digestible. They have sort of digestible stories and personalities. And so that makes it a lot easier for a player to step into that world, to become companions with those characters. And then the level design especially, I gotta say. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's all really good, but the atmosphere, just the aesthetics of the game are super solid. The audio design, the visual design, the environment. I love the environment. Looks really cool. But the level design really calls out to me, especially because it's a game about multiple asymmetrical character navigation. There's a game for the Nintendo 64. Jesus, I'm gonna look this up. Was it Blinks 2? Blinks 2 and N64, is that right? Am I remembering that right? Blinks 2 Masters of Time and Space. Yeah, I think it was this. Was it actually 2-player co-op or was it single-player co-op? I have like a vague memory of the end of my undergrad when I started getting into games, and I probably went to like GDC for the first time and had a professor who brought me to like an industry party, and I don't know, Microsoft Game Studio, or yeah, I guess that's who it would have been. Was just like handing out copies of, yeah, this doesn't really tell me a lot very much. Handing out copies of Blinks 2 and other games like that. I think if I remember Blinks 2, it was you switch between different characters, and different characters traverse the world differently. Oh shit, like this, I should give a plug right here for a game called Smooth Criminals, which I will be posting a trailer for sometime in the next week, because it's showing at USC's Demo Day next Wednesday. Smooth Criminals is a student game. Similarly, you've got 4 characters, but they sort of travel in a pack, and they all have different abilities, and you're art thieves, and you're trying to heist like paintings off of out of a gallery. Same sort of idea, though. All of these games, these are asymmetrical traversal games, and they're really difficult to design. It's really difficult. I mean, it's hard enough just to design good levels that feel consistently interesting to move through, that have sort of interesting features and have a pace and have a narrative arc of their own. But when you start to like have multiple paths that overlap and intersect, and then are partially exclusive and involve gates and keys and things like that, like it gets super complicated, and not just like complicated to map out, but complicated to design in a way that feels good to play. And so props to this game for managing to do that and doing it like really very nicely. In the section that I've played, that I've seen, like it feels really, really good. Yeah. And then, I can see where we're going. That's another thing that I really appreciate in games. Like, it's nice to know that this game is, about 15 hours long. But to have the game give you a sense, the way that this one does, of the future progression of it is like really, really nice. So I have 2 characters, or I've seen 3 characters. I was playing the game with 2. Now I'm back to playing the game with 1. I know that there's a total of 4. Like I feel a good sense of these characters are all on arcs that are going to bring them together eventually, and then they're powering up. Like, each one of them is getting more and more abilities, and I don't know how many abilities total they're each going to have, but like they're each going to level up a little bit. And you know, we've already gotten the mesmerize mask and the now the ice skates, and each of those abilities has like a really nice impact on the gameplay, on actually what you do, creating, you know, actually like new possibilities for traversal. Again, a lot of this comes back, for me at least, to Link in the Past, which was you know, in a simpler way, was not really a multiple like an asymmetrical traversal game, but it was that sort of like Metroidvania style items as keys to different kinds of doors, right? You get the hook shot, and now there's a whole class of traversal options that were closed to you that are open to you. So now I have the ice skates, and there are streams that I used to not be able to pass that now I can pass, and that's more complex because all of my characters have to find a way from point A to point B. And so now this character has a new way to explore new spaces, but that doesn't mean that all of the characters are going to be able to all explore those spaces. It's really, it's very, very cool design. And it's possible to do it very badly, and this game is doing it very well. So anyway, that's my whole, that's my spiel. That's what I wanted to say. Let's start with Aslak, who has a... Oh, no, it's fine. It doesn't matter. Who has posed a couple of questions. A clarification. So the miners think that they're on the moon. The moon's surface points down on the Earth. So above the Earth, the surface points down. If you dig through the surface, you'll fall to Earth, and the sun is just outside. The sun is so if you would expect that you dig down, break the crust of the moon, see the sun outside the surface of the moon, and potentially fall towards the Earth from the moon. Yeah, it's crazy. It's like wild and cool and interesting and clearly wrong, right? Like that's an inaccurate conception of the world that they live in, but also like a religion that you have to sort of understand has some fundamental precepts that that as an outsider you're not familiar with, and it's just narratively, I think it's very cool to do that at the very beginning, to throw a player into that. I don't know if that's has a relationship with the first game with Teslagrad, if those characters are you know, the miners or the moon has featured before, but for a first time experience for a new player who's coming in at this point, that's kind of the experience, is that you get thrown into this world, and your first impression of the world is that the folks in it are a little bit crazy, are a little bit kind of wacky, like not that they are not intelligent, not that they're sort of but that they are operating. I mean, it's very specific, it's very explicit about the fact that they're operating under an enforced belief structure that is weird and wrong. So that's interesting. Our idea is that you have ability sets instead of one big ability inventory, like in Link to the Past or other Zelda games. So ability sets, do you mean that sort of per character? Like each character has a set of abilities? as opposed to obviously Link, who's a single character, and so all of the abilities in the game that you gather Link has to sort of take them all on. It seems like, I don't know if this is consistent, if this plays out the same way later on, but so far in this game, I'm seeing a structure where you sort of bring all of your characters with you in the general overworld. Well, I'll call it the overworld, and then you have just one character, Miss Terry, was able to enter that temple to get the artifact. And then there was a whole section of gameplay that was just that one character, and sort of really exploring that one character's set of abilities. And then, coming back out and rejoining with the rest of the characters, and all the rest of the characters have to move as a group until, now I guess obviously I'm in a section where Nos is the only character, and I'm exploring just Nos's set of abilities. That's cool. I like that arrangement, and I like that you're able to simplify the interface. All of the, well, I mean, I think all of the Zelda games I have not played. I actually haven't played a couple of the most recent ones, but in my experience, all of the Zelda games have an interface, have an inventory where you have to sort of choose one tool at a time, one or two tools at a time, and then you have the ability associated with that tool, and then when you want a new ability, you have to sort of go into an inventory interface and swap them out. And in this game, each character has a small enough inventory that they can just have the tools that they have. I don't ever have to take off my ice skates. I don't ever have to take off my mesmer mask. That just becomes part of my ability set, because the total number of abilities is spread between 4 different characters. Yeah, one set for each character. So when you switch characters, you change out a number of abilities at the same time, rather than just, one for one. Change the hook shot for the rook's feather or whatever. Use totems to fast travel, so you can bring a character to a place where you need them, but each character must find the totem to fast travel there. That's the most interesting part of this game for me so far, is that I had an inherent expectation that that it was going to be about sort of finding the next totem. And then that would allow me to just bring all of my characters to that next totem. Does that make sense? That it would be a game about the group, my group of characters pushing against the frontier of the unknown, sort of with individual characters' abilities, but pushing as a group. And it's very much not that. It's very much about each of these characters as individuals, individually traversing a difficult landscape in very different ways, finding their own very different ways to do that, and necessarily cooperating. So not working as a unit, not sort of having these sort of very ludic shortcuts to make them feel like a team because they're treated conceptually as a single entity. They're never treated as a single entity. They're always treated as individuals, and so actually when they cooperate, because they're forced to cooperate, that cooperation feels even more meaningful. I mean, it's very, very nice design. That cooperation feels even more meaningful because it's the individuals cooperating together, rather than sort of like the group entity using its inherent abilities to accomplish something. it really, really, I mean, it's amazing. This is exactly the kind of thing. I'm trying to think now how I can incorporate this into a lecture in the fall, because I think it's, if I can figure out how to do it, it's valid and valuable. But this is exactly the kind of small change, and from a like systems and coding standpoint, it's a very small change. It's just, do all characters have access to all totems, or are the totems tracked individually per character? That's the whole thing. That's the whole change that I'm talking about. And it drastically alters the character of the game. It makes the game feel very, very different. And then because of that choice, your level design changes, and the types of puzzles that you include in the game change. And you can see that sort of domino down. You can really feel how that core experience decision affects everything in the design of the game and the process of producing it. Gorgeous. So Aslak says, that was actually a design that we explored, but we wanted the characters to have separate stories that intertwine. And that's awesome. I mean, that's exactly sort of what it does. It accomplishes that. It makes it so that the characters feel much more individual, and so you pay more attention to their individual stories and the ways that they intertwine. And that's what I was saying. When they cooperate, it feels like their individual stories are intertwining rather than just stuff. You're doing stuff. Very cool. What did you think of being put into it without much information about who the characters are? So, like I said, and there's another question down here. I mean, let's so actually Eve also sort of commented on the characters and the way that I talked about them. So let's do both of these at the same time. Eve said, you talked about how easily recognizable character types are. Would you say that that's a good use of tropes? Are there particular conditions that make the use of tropes a good thing? So yes, absolutely yes to all of these things. I think that, tropes and archetypes are basically two words for the same thing. It basically means well-established, recognizable narrative conventions that can be employed as shorthand for something that the audience will recognize and be able to process easily. So being put into the game without much information about who the characters are, the fact that I feel like they're fairly broadly drawn, they have sort of basic relationships. I have, or at least some of them do. Some of them have basic relationships, familial relationships, friendships, or kind of like, commercial adversarial relationships. Honestly, the fact that I can describe their relationships in such broad terms, the Teslamancer at the beginning, whose name I absolutely do not remember because it was at the very beginning, all of the relationships that she has with characters in the world are familial. It's, her dad, she's chasing her dad, she meets her brother, or her siblings, and her siblings are mischievous, and her mom, I think her mom shows up, or another sort of, it feels like a family member shows up and says, don't do that or you'll be transported to a lost world that will never find you again. That's part of, I think, the definition of that character. That's a character who is embedded in that family and now removed from it, and is that's the fish out of water character. That's the character that's from somewhere else and doesn't understand this world. We haven't really gotten to spend a lot of time with that character. Then you've got Nos, who is young and childish, not optimistic, but idealistic, doesn't like to lie, wants to find the truth, and not just find the truth, but sort of expose the truth, and wants to be heroic, like wants to help people and save people, and all of his relationships are friendships. He's like, I feel like he's got all of these people around who are friends who don't quite trust him and don't quite believe him because he's a little bit out there, but he wants to protect them. He wants to help them, all of them, even the ones that are less concerned about his well-being. And then you've got Miss Terry, who is just out for herself, and wants to profit, and doesn't really care who she works for, or who she works with, but would prefer not to work with anybody, and just wants to sort of like find the way out of this mess that is going to work out the best for her. And so all of her relationships are like contractual. She's got a boss who owes her money. She's got an adversary who is a business adversary, who's a rival for her work. That's sort of how she views the world, and so that's the way that the game frames her. And so it's very, very easy for all of these characters to sort of immediately understand the way that we can relate to them, and the way that we can sort of think about them and treat them as characters, and to sort of know that, I think that I said this before, but the writing of those characters in archetypes, in broad strokes, matches with the audio design and the visual design, and it all is, it's very cohesive. I'm trying to think about the other way to go is a game like, I don't know, you have a game like Skyrim, and Skyrim's a rough example because it's a game of such a different scope and genre, but it's a game with sort of a similar world. It's a fantasy world that's full of monsters and characters that you can talk to. And that the aesthetic for that game is much more gradiated. It's much more shaded. It's got a more realistic palette, and the visual design is much more about sort of these realistic, photorealistic details, and the characters, whether it's successful or not, are intended to be characters who have sort of like rich personal lives, and they've got routines, and they go off and they do stuff, even when you're not there, and they sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad, and sometimes they're sort of like in between, and they do bad things out of selfishness, or they do good things, or they do good things out of selfishness. Like there's meant to be more more shading, I guess, to who those characters are, and that fits with that aesthetic. That's all cohesive for the most part. Sometimes it just flails in Skyrim, but a lot of the time it works, and when it works, it's all working together. So I think it's not about what is better, like is one of those choices better than the other. I think that it's about finding an aesthetic that is cohesive across all of these different elements, and then matching them all together and creating something that sort of works. And I feel like World to the West does that, has this sort of storybook, cartoonish, but more sophisticated than you might expect cartoonish quality that is reflected across its character design, its enemy design, its visual style, its audio design, and its writing. Is going westward like this game's cutting the rope? I doubt it. Maybe. I mean, that is what we have been doing generally, is we started off in town and we've just been exploring this world to the west. My impression, based on absolutely nothing, is that this is the world that is to the west of Teslagrad. And, again, there's a lore, like presumably there's lore in Teslagrad in the game that provides context that I don't have, but about, who the Teslamancers are. And the kind of society that they live in, and how that's different from the kinds of societies that we've seen so far. So maybe there is sort of a generally westward movement in the game, and maybe that just is to accentuate the fact that the world to the east is known to us, at least presumably. It's known to Teslagrad, but the world to the west is a mystery. It's a wild frontier. So I'm just gonna repeat some of the things that Aslak is saying in chat. Our characters are cartoony, and one of the reasons is to reflect their abilities and gameplay. So as an example, Terry has abilities that are about manipulating others. Oh yeah, absolutely. And she's a bit cynical and business-minded as a result. Yeah, totally. Yes. Yeah. That's a fantastic point, is that not only is there a sort of an aesthetic cohesion to all of these things, but looking at it from a character basis, an aesthetic cohesion is something that you always want in a game, right? With very limited exception, where discordance is the point, where you're using it to draw attention to a specific element or something like that. Aesthetic cohesion is something that you want in any game, regardless of what the cohesion is. But this game, because it's character based, and it's the asymmetric traversal mechanics, the abilities that each character has that are different from other characters, that allow them to do different things, and the fact that the play of the game is entirely based around those characters having different abilities and doing different things because of them, then that works its way into the character design, which is super important in this game in particular, is less important in other games. But because this game is all about those characters and their abilities and differentiating between them and having them feel like individuals, creating a resonance between their abilities and their personalities is great. I mean, that ties them together as characters, and so having those personalities that are easily digestible and having them relate to to their abilities, having a character who is a kid whose abilities are all about sort of moving through transgressive spaces, really, climbing through holes in walls, digging tunnels underneath the things that are going on, skating like the most childish, that's wow, that reflects an odd worldview, I guess. But there is something sort of childish. There is something playful and joyful and childlike about strapping blades onto your feet so that you can glide across the frozen water. All of that sort of is based on and is the basis for the character. Very cool. Once you switch to Naus, you're scared of the grues, but when you play as Terry, it's just a tool. So the design and animation feel of the characters must help the player change their mindset quickly. Fantastic. That's awesome. That's really, really cool. That's really cool. I love that. Well-designed characters. Elegantly designed to the point where I really didn't even appreciate how clever it all was until we sort of talked through it. How well those characters, their personalities are charming, they're personable, they're relatable, they're sympathetic enough that I care about them. I don't find them annoying or irritating or cloying. I find them sort of interesting. I want to play as them. I find them funny, like they employ humor well. And they also integrate so neatly into their individual mechanics. Really well done. Really fabulously done. Okay. Would you say this game grew on you? Grue, I mean, it's interesting. Grue, I've only really ever heard grue used in the context of Zork. And I find that interesting. I don't know. I mean, I know the origin of the grue as a creature and a mechanic within Zork. That they wanted the game to feel like it was more expansive than it could actually be, and so rather than gating off areas by putting walls up, which makes it just feel like a very confined maze, they would gate areas by putting up empty space, and then having a mechanic where if you wander into the empty space or you go too far into empty space, you're killed. There is a narrative reason why you can't do that, and so you won't go that direction expecting to find something. But at the same time, it feels different than if there was just a wall there. But a grue, I don't know if that does that have an origin beyond that? Where does that name come from? I've never heard of that type of monster, so I'm curious if this is inspired by Zork directly. That Zork has sort of given the world the grue, and this game has adopted it as a monster type, or indirectly, if there's actually sort of like a legacy of grues in video games that I'm not aware of or isn't coming to mind for me, or if there's actually sort of an independent cause, something that that Zork took grues from, that this game is also taking grues from. Monster started in Teslagrad as a darkness monster. We liked our version of it so much we brought it over to this game. They don't have the same mechanic anymore. It's just a little tribute, and it's a cool name. In Norwegian, gruesome means terrible. Gruesome. In English, too. Gruesome, spelled a little bit differently, also means terrible, with the connotation of like bloody. It's like some kind of a body horror, some sort of that there's actually gruesome means that somebody has been physically injured in a way that's difficult to look at, that's terrible. Grue. Cool. I don't think I've ever made that connection between grue and gruesome. That's a what's the word for that when the reverse reverse formation, when the etymology of the word is based on another word that has a similar structure, and so then sort of, if gruesome, the word gruesome suggests that something that is gruesome is of a likeness with a grue, and so the word grue sort of can be invented out of that. I don't know. Is there... Wait, Eve, did you find a mythology for a grue? A fictional predatory monster that dwells in the dark, from the Dying Earth universe, which I don't know of. Zork. Other Infocom games. Hacker culture. Yeah, so I don't know that it predates... I don't know what Dying Earth is. What's Dying Earth? Dying Earth is a 1950 novel. Interesting. Very, very fascinating. Okay. Did the would I say the game grew on me? Yeah. No, I like how the characters were introduced and then sort of expanded. Not so much narratively, but mechanically, right? And their personalities don't grow. They don't really become more sophisticated, I guess. Their personalities don't really become more sophisticated, but they're deepened by the mechanical abilities that they get. I liked all of that. Seems like you were having trouble reading the terrain and the map properly. Do you think the colors should be more distinct, or is the aesthetic worth the potential confusion? The aesthetic's really good. Generally, I like the color palette. I think so I got two things that were causing confusion for me. One is the map. I'm not in love with the map. The map has a sort of a different aesthetic to it that is a little bit sort of hand-drawn, but not hand-drawn with a particular character. It just kind of suffers from a hand-drawn vagueness, and it's color-coded in a way that I think is aligned with the color palette of the game, but actually, did I ever zoom in? That was as far as I could zoom in. I was able to zoom out enough. I mean, not a huge amount, but enough. But I could never zoom in further than I did. So the colors on the map do, I think, correspond to the color palette that's used in world to show things like the water, rivers, the soft ground paths, the hard ground paths. The problem is that they're a lot easier to understand in the context of the world, where you're also seeing fairly rich detail that is modeled and animated. Like, I'm never going to look at the water and mistake that for something else. I actually did look at the hard ground at one point and mistake it for water. And that's maybe a problem of in the underworld, in the cave world, that color palette is compressed, and so it's a little bit trickier to distinguish between things. One potential fix would be to just try to have all three of those terrain types present on screens whenever possible, so that it's one thing if I come out of the soft ground or I'm in the soft ground and the soft ground is surrounded by dark ground, by hard ground, and that's all I see. I just see those two things. It's easier for me to mistake that for water. But if there is a river somewhere nearby and I can see, oh, no, wait, that's what water looks like, then it's easier for me to make the connection to this as hard ground. The other thing that is that you could sort of but I think water has a lot of detail to it. Like, I would never mistake water for something else. It's just that the hard ground is a little bit flat. It's not as detailed, and it's not really animated. There are moments when you have little bugs crawling around the hard ground, and that's great. I love that. And you don't want to, like, avalanche the player with that kind of a thing, but strategically placing those kinds of little animations could help. That wasn't my major problem. I only ran into that once. The major problem that I had was on the map itself, where the rivers are dark and the are like a dark gray, and the soft ground is like a light blue, and the hard ground is like a dark blue. And in the vagueness of that pseudo hand-drawn map, there's not enough cues for me to recognize straight away which of those things is which. I keep thinking that, like, the light blue, which looks like water, is sort of a watercolor, that should be a river. But it's not. That's the soft ground. The rivers are dark because we're underground. But they're not. They're darker than the other dark, which is also ground. I mean, part of it is that when I'm looking at the map, I'm less concerned about the difference between hard ground and soft ground, and so the fact that they are differentiated on the map is a little bit weird to me. I mostly just want to know where are the paths and where are the obstacles that intersect the paths. And so there's kind of just too many colors, and there's not a clear code to the color. Like, the coding of the colors is not super clear to me in the context of the map. Like, I got used to it. I eventually figured it out, but I had to sort of work at it a little bit to get it to figure it out. And that's where that's the bit that I wasn't as crazy about. I think that that could be clarified a little bit. It's based directly on world geometry. Okay, that's great. I love this kind of detail. Aslak, thank you so much for being here and sharing stuff with this with us about this. So the map is based directly on world geometry. It's not designed to be something that you would navigate by entirely. It's intentionally made vague. Details are eliminated. to make it just a map, so that you can't just like play the whole game in your head by looking at the map, right? But it's you know, it's not an art piece that was separately generated. It is generated based on the geometry of the world, and that makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. For one thing, if at some point the level design changes, then the map is automatically updated. There doesn't need to be like an additional pass on updating the art on the map to reflect that. The problem is that now you've got a map that's generated by a algorithm, by a sort of automated process that's run over the geometry, and you know, it's hard to create an automated process that is going to be able to give exactly the level of detail in all of the places that directs a player exactly the way that you want them directed. So I think it's a trade-off, and it's a good choice to make for small team. You know, this is Rain Games is a small group that's working on limited resources, and being able to automate something like that makes a ton of sense. But you can see how that is a trade-off, right? How there is sort of a like all aspects of game development, there's a compromise there, and you can see sort of where that compromise takes its form. Cool. Yeah, I mean, please don't please don't take offense at any of this. Like I said, I love the game, and you did a great job with the map, especially under the circumstances that you're describing as you know, the development of the game. You know, this is part of how I like to sort of look at games, is understanding what the decisions that were made, what those decisions were, why they might have been made, and how they impacted the game. Good. Thank you. Okay, a couple more. Jason asks, who the F is jasoncubarhodes? Cubar. I in my head, I swear to God, I always pronounce it Cubar. Cubar. Who is jasoncubarhodes? Jason, I cannot answer this question for you. This is a question, I mean, really, seriously, this is a question that only you can answer. I can tell you that you are Kubar forever, absolutely. You're an intelligent, emotionally expressive, artistic, talented, engaged, enthusiastic, passionate, and you've got a what is this? You've got a not rebellious, but you just, I mean, you know, you like to ask this kind of question. You like to sort of like push. You like to push in a way that is delightful. That is absolutely delightful. Impish? I'm going to say impish. Let's go with that. You've got an impish side. But that's just an outside perspective. I think you've really got to dig deep, and I would love to hear your answer to this question. Okay, any oh god. Okay, Aslak is taking off. Thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the insight. Appreciate that so much. And thank you for introducing us to this game, which is fantastic, and goes on sale on Steam today. So go and pick it up. Check it out. It is really cool. It is very, very well done. There's a lot of thought and effort that's gone into it. Aslak has stayed up all night with us, and I very much appreciate that. That is, above and beyond what an indie game dev should have to do. So thank you for joining our community. And have a wonderful launch day. I hope it goes fabulously. Discoverability of game mechanics seemed like a lot of magical moments finding a new mechanic. Yeah, I mean, it's helped by the fact that all of those mechanics feel really good. And especially the movement mechanics. Every character ends up having a different sort of movement mechanic. And they all feel different, and they all feel satisfying. It's fun to move around the world using those different things. How do you feel about becoming a Twitch affiliate? Does it mean you'll do more with the channel? Oh, Jesus Christ, that's a big question. Stay tuned. Let's see. I got plans. But I always have plans, and they don't always work. So we will see. I'm super, super pleased to be invited to be a Twitch affiliate. Thank you to Twitch for doing that. Thank you especially to all of you who are the ones who qualified me for that. I appreciate that very much. It is a testament to your involvement in this community and stubborn fucking dedication to like showing up every week and listening to me blather on about video games, that this has happened. It doesn't change an enormous amount right off the bat. I don't think, although I very much appreciate the cheers this stream, guys. Thank you. But I do kind of have plans, and this is kind of a good first step towards the potential for something larger that is still being worked out. I'm incredibly trying to figure out what the hell that is. But I'm sure we will figure that out together. Do you hope there are dragons in this game? Yeah. I think dragons would fit in neatly in this game. I think that God, I can't answer these questions. Okay, this is it. Dragons. We're ending at dragons. Yeah, I think dragons fit in neatly. I mean, grues have established a sort of fantasy atmosphere, narrative context, and so there's a precedent, essentially. I'm trying to think about how dragons behave in a way that's interesting, given the behavior that we already see from, like, for example, the grues. Grues are in another game, I might expect dragons to sort of work that way. For some characters, they're terrifying. They're all you can do is try to escape them, and they are difficult to escape. They move as quickly as you do, and have better pathfinding, at least than I do. I guess that my little minor character was able to smack the grue with a hammer in order to kind of get away, and or at least to buy himself a little bit of time. And I guess that a dragon probably, one-ups that, and is something that's even harder to deal with. I guess, what I think a dragon probably does is take advantage of the idea of verticality that has been introduced through several different mechanics, and is part of the sort of interesting general constraints of the game. None of the characters can jump, but they all have to traverse levels vertically, and find different ways to do that, and all of them have different ways to do that. And a dragon that is, a terrifying monster like other monsters, but that you can't hide from by going to higher ground, or lower ground by sort of all of the traditional means that you have discovered for putting distance between yourself and the threat. Crawling into a hole, jumping over a river, scarfing over a river, finding your way to higher ground, creating sort of a physical separation. If a dragon can sort of just move freely, or more freely than other creatures, that becomes a terrifying prospect. And I think that would be a really interesting thing to have in the game, in sort of a later section. Awesome. Cool. Thanks, guys. That's it for me. I was gonna do this early. This was gonna be an early night, and then I started talking. Well, I don't even know what I talked about. I talked about aesthetic cohesion and dragons, and now it's 10:30. So thank you, and it's later where you all are. So thank you, all of you, for being here. It's a pleasure as always. I hope that you enjoyed seeing this game, and this is a little bit different than what we've done before. This is a brand new game. It's not released yet, that hasn't gotten out, hasn't gotten a ton of press, doesn't really have a reputation yet, and so it's hard to know what we're getting into. I am super pleased with how it turned out, and I really enjoyed the experience of trying something so new and unknown, and sharing it with you guys. That was really cool. That was a lot of fun. I believe that there's going to be an after class tomorrow. Tomorrow is a complicated day, because of finals and the opening of the graduate thesis show at Interactive Media and Games here at USC. Despite all of that, I think that there will be an after class. Possibly it's just going to be me on a couch playing something. But stay tuned to Twitter, and I'll give you updates as they exist. Yeah, I hope you guys have a lovely evening. I'll see you tomorrow, and I'll see you next week. Okay, bye.